are joined now by Jim Polzin from the Wisconsin State Journal. Jim, how are you today?
Good. How are you guys?
We are doing well. We are previewing Wisconsin on our breakdown of Nebraska's schedule this year. Wisconsin in somewhat of a similar position as Nebraska, getting a new coach in the offseason and arguably the biggest name on the market. Jim, I'm curious, what was the reaction to the hiring of Luke Fickell both in the moment, and how do people feel about him now that he's had a few months on the job?
I would say in the moment there was shock at first. I think probably 85 to 90% of this fan base just assumed that Jim Leonhard was going to get promoted from interim to head coach, and I think I've certainly thought that too. So I don't know that Luke Fickell's name really hadn't come up during the process, and I know, just speaking personally, I kind of looked at him as a guy that had turned down other pretty good jobs and thought he'd be pretty picky and didn't really think that Wisconsin was a place where he would end up. So when that all kind of developed over the course of 12 hours or something from the end of the regular season to that news coming out, I think people took a while to kind of digest it. But I do think there was an initial excitement that has really just only built since then. Like, I think people are kind of excited by the possibilities. That there's certainly been a new energy that Fickell and his staff have brought to recruiting and just marketing and everything. So I think it's so far without really coaching a game, I think people consider it a big win in terms of the hire.
Speaking of recruiting, you go, I guess, portal, and I look at quarterback, and Tanner Mordecai coming from SMU. Gotta like that, I guess. It feels like probably an upgraded quarterback. I mean, specifically passing. But do you think that the future, maybe not this year, just because of the running back stable that's still there at Wisconsin, do you think Wisconsin's gonna be more of a passing, I guess, threat down the road? I know the new offensive coordinator definitely likes to throw it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's going to be different, and I think they are going to throw the ball a little bit more. Even this season, I think they'll throw the ball more than they have in the past. I think that the difference this year is it's more of an up tempo. They're going to run more plays, so there will be more pass plays. They're not going to shy away from the run. They've got Braylon Allen and Jordan Lewis in the backfield. They're not going to go away from that. But yeah, I mean, this quarterback, quarterback is a position that's held them back. Really since Jack Cohn in 2019. Right. They went to the Rose Bowl that season. So they needed to upgrade that position. They did it, and they did it fast. Mordecai was added through the portal. Braden Locke's a guy from Mississippi State that is the backup now. Nick Evers is a former 4-star guy that was at Oklahoma. And then they got a couple recruiting hits for future classes. So they really, over the span of really a month or two, completely changed the dynamic of that room, and really, I think that's one of the reasons fans are, if they were a little skeptical of the Fickell hire, they quickly jumped on board.
Jim, I'm curious, you mentioned the up-tempo style that Phil Longo brings to the table, and we've talked about Tanner Mordecai coming in. They kind of have addressed the quarterback spot. I know they have brought in a bunch of wide receivers that they're excited about, as well as having some returners as well. But is it possible the most challenging part of the up-tempo offense is going to be how that big offensive line adjusts to running that many more plays?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been an area of that room has not lived up to the standard in recent years. Now, in their defense, part of it is, good luck trying to create running room when you're running the 8 and 9-man boxes all the time. And that's something they just faced. But yeah, it's an adjustment. They seem to be on board with it. I think that was one of the things in the spring that you just kind of you look for is, how do these guys, what are they saying? How are they acting? Do they seem like they're on board with this change? Because it is a pretty big change. And they seem to like it. They're the new offensive line coach, Jack Bicknell, works them hard. They make a mistake, they have to run. And there was a lot of spring practices where they were running sprints afterwards because of mental errors. But I think they, it's a little bit like the fan base. It's new and it's exciting, and I think they're all kind of willing to give it a try. And we'll see. Again, like all this comes down to how you do on Saturdays, and we'll see how that adjustment goes.
The offensive line is, I think, one of the most talented, or I guess clearly deepest position groups on the team. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but feels like that's a pretty good place to start if you're in your first year and you're Luke Fickell and you have all that returning, I guess, as far as offensive line is concerned, and the strength there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you got a left tackle in Jack Nelson, who some people think might be a first-round pick next year, and Tatterborn Leedy's another guy who's, again, he's on draft boards and he's played multiple positions. They brought in a couple transfers. Fickell brought with him from Cincinnati just to kind of, Renfro's, and we didn't see much of Renfro in the spring. So if that's a spot he can lock down, then all of a sudden you look a lot better, because you got a returning right tackle. You've got a guy in Michael Furtney at guard that has played a lot of football here. So yeah, I mean, on paper, it's a pretty good group, and I think it goes back to what you said before: is how big of an adjustment is this to a new up-tempo offense, and how quickly do they adapt?
We're talking with Jim Polzin of the Wisconsin State Journal, previewing the Wisconsin Badgers on our Nebraska football schedule breakdown. As usually is the case when you've got a new quarterback, new OC, a lot of the eyes are on the offensive side of the ball. Talking about players specifically, a lot of eyes are going to be on Tanner Mordecai. But outside of him, is there a newcomer or a couple of guys that you look at as being a pretty major contributor this year?
Now, you mentioned receiver before, and that's another room that they've just completely it's revamped. And you had some holdovers. Chimere Dike is a guy who's played a lot of football here and is a good player. I think he's really going to flourish in this new system. But they brought with them a transfer from Cincinnati, Will Pauling, and the transfer that got the most buzz in the offseason was C.J. Williams from USC.
Yeah.
But I think Pauling was the guy in spring that really stood out and was the most consistent of the bunch. And they'll put him in the slot. He's a guy that can, I think, make some plays over the middle. And then you throw a DK and C.J. Williams on the field. Bryson Green is a transfer from Oklahoma State who's was basically the number 2 receiver at Oklahoma State. Didn't see him in the spring because of a shoulder injury. So he's another guy that's a starter-like quality. So, suddenly that's a room that you just, didn't think a ton about, and through additions, it looks good and it looks exciting, and we'll see what kind of numbers those guys can put up, because again, like it's not something that this fan base is used to in terms of receivers putting up numbers.
Braylon Allen wins the Heisman if he does what?
That's a good question. I don't know that. I'm curious to see how the run pass distribution splits up, but he's excited. I mean, there was talk of him transferring after last season, and I think Michigan made a run at him. And I think part of it was just the uncertainty. He really liked Jim Leonard. I think he wanted to kind of see who was next and what they were bringing in, and I think he sat down with Phil Longo and Luke Fickell and was like, "Yeah, this offense suits me. There's just going to be, like I said before, less running into 8-man boxes and more space to work with in theory." So yeah, I mean, he could put up big numbers. I'm curious to see if Ches Malusi steals some of that production. So I don't know. Like it's to me, the Heisman is always one of those things that's going to go to one of the best teams in the country, and I just don't think Wisconsin's quite there yet. Like, I just don't think they're a team that's going to win the Big Ten or be in a playoff this season.
Can they win the West? They're clearly, I think the West is pretty open, right?
Yeah, I think that's a realistic goal. I really do. And the schedule is pretty favorable this year in terms of, the crossover games. They have Ohio State. It's at home, but they don't have Michigan. They don't have Penn State. So yeah, I do think they can win the West, and then, but I still think it's an uphill battle to beat whoever comes out of the East, whether it's, Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State.
That Ohio State game, I believe that's the week after Ohio State plays Penn State. And it's probably going to be it's October. Yeah. So probably a night game, right? and Camp Rundle night game would be pretty.
I'll say that might
pretty
be
lit up for that
might be
one.
a nice atmosphere.
And frankly, like if you look at it, if they can, get by Iowa and not slip up against Washington State, they have a really good shot. Wisconsin does, is being undefeated going into that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think people around here kind of are eyeing that same path that you are. We'll see. To me, the Washington State game is still kind of tricky. That's a team that beat this team last year, so I'm not marking it down as an automatic win. But yeah, I mean, there's a chance to make that Ohio State game a really, really big game, and then you see what happens. But to me, like the talent level across the board, I just think this program's got a little bit of building to do yet before I can put them in the same breath as Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State.
And it helps that the Big Ten West everyone is pretty much not great right now. So
right, yeah, I don't know who you can kind of count on Iowa being Iowa.
Right.
Minnesota's, got a chance. Illinois was good last year. We'll see if that continues. But yeah, I do think Wisconsin's the favorite. I just, I don't know that I would say it's an overwhelming thing.
Mm-hmm. Jim, I'm curious. You mentioned Jim Leonhard. Obviously, not only was a candidate for head coach, but was before that one of the best defensive coordinators in the conference, certainly, and probably the country as well. Does that put an extra level of scrutiny on Mike Tressel and the job he has to do? Or I guess, how do you view that with, he's kind of replacing both a successful and fairly beloved guy at that spot?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tressel's a pretty low key guy. I think he's handled this pretty well. He's spoken very highly of Leonhard, but you're right. I mean, I've used the word standard a couple times during this conversation. There's a pretty good standard on defense, and it's been one that's been very consistently good over the years. I think the interesting thing is Tressel and Fickell run a little bit different defense. They want to run a 3-3-5 at some point. Leonhard was a 3-4 guy. I think there's kind of going to be tweaks and a little bit of both. You're going to see a little bit of a combo platter with that. But I'm curious to see how that plays out. I'm curious to see how a defense, that if you look around at the country, at the teams in the country that run this air raid offense, it's always a little bit tough on the defense because there are situations where it's 3 and out and you're right back on the field. So again, that's not something these defensive players are typically used to. They're used to getting a pretty good break because the offense, even if it's a 3 and out, is gonna run the ball 2 or 3 times and take some time off the clock and give the defense a chance to rest. So all these things are just kind of new things that I'm curious to see how they play out in 2023.
Jim, you mentioned the 3-3-5 scheme that Tressel and Fickell are kind of known for. Coming from a 3-4, do you think having at least the same, that odd man front allows for a little bit easier transition personnel-wise to what they're trying to do?
Yeah, I do. That, and the other thing I think that makes it a little bit easier is Hunter Wohler is one of the really good safeties at Wisconsin. He's a guy that was, pretty heavily recruited. They feel like they can move him around, and we saw in the spring that, he is a guy that they can just move all over the defense and be, a little bit of a playmaker. So I think that helps. I mean, the personnel is not completely where they want it yet. I mean, they certainly have, and we saw this in the offseason, but they want to get more safeties on the roster and guys that are a little bit more versatile, can cover, can come up and help with the run. But having a Hunter Wohler certainly helps in terms of what you can do. And there's enough experience kind of at all 3 levels returning that I think they feel like, we can do a little bit of the old, but we can blend in some of the new.
Is there fear at all or any sort of trepidation of, okay, this offense and it's totally going to be different, down the road maybe than what Wisconsin's used to? I guess you can draw a comparison between what Scott Frost tried to do at Nebraska and we're going to come in and the Big Ten's going to have to change for us, which absolutely did not happen. Is there any sort of like that's the comp I can make here, but is there any sort of fear from the fan base maybe at all about, I don't know if I'm going to like this?
I think, yeah, it's funny. It's a good way to put it. I mean, I think there's excitement, and yet there's also a little bit of, I don't know, fear is a strong word.
Hesitation.
There's nervousness. Yeah. Yep. There's hesitation. And there's like, can this work? And we've seen it other places that it didn't work out. It's just going to be so different. And yet I just think if you, and no fan is the same, but if you kind of poll the fans, I think it's been basically 30 years of
the same thing.
Yeah. And I think, right. And I think there was a lot of winning in there. I don't want to make it seem like these fans are spoiled, but I think they're ready for something different. And that's why I think this was kind of, Luke Fickell was kind of a wow hire. And then when he announced that he was bringing Phil Longo into some version of the air raid, it was like, whoa, like this is just completely different. And we're excited to see how it plays out.
Jim, we appreciate your time. That's Jim.
I got one small one just because I'm a New York Jets fan. And Joe Tippmann is going to be a 10-year starter at center for the Jets, correct? Am I right on this?
I think so. If he stays healthy, I mean, he's a guy that when he was healthy here, he was just really, really, really good, just solid. And I think so. I like that pick a lot. I really do. And I think Joe's a guy who's going to work hard and really fundamentally sound. There's been a lot of good centers here. And I think you can put Tippmann in that same conversation.
That's what I like to hear, Jim. Thank you.
Jim, I apologize. I try and get out of each interview without Mike asking a Jets question, and I'm very rarely successful. I thought I had it done with you, but he snuck in there at the last second. No, Jim, we very much appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll talk to you again down the road.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
Thanks.
That is Jim Polzin from the Wisconsin State Journal. So I wanted to talk about Phil Longo a little bit.
Yeah,
because
I think it's just gonna be odd.
So it's
like this year's got to look a lot differently than what next year's gonna do.
Well,
because they're running back.
So there's a couple things with Phil Longo, okay? Because
I don't know if Tanner Mordecai is going to be like as good as people think.
I think he's a good fit for the system,
right?
I think he has really good familiarity with the air raid concepts and things like that. So even if he's not as talented as maybe a guy that they're going to have coming down the road, I think he's a really good transition piece.
No, I mean that's fair.
But here's the thing I wanted to talk about with Phil Longo, though, is I think people they overreact to the air raid tag that he gets.
Yeah, that's not fair.
Because he does run air raid concepts, right, with his passing game.
Yeah.
But okay, you go back to 2020. This guy had two backs at North Carolina that ran for 1,000 yards each in 2020. The
Michael Clark.
I hate you.
Sorry.
At Sam Houston State. Over the course of a couple of years, his team's averaged 240 yards rushing per game. He was at Ole Miss between those two stops.
Right.
This is not your traditional air raid offense, is my point.
No.
In the sense that he's come out and said, especially, he did some pretty in-depth interviews when he got hired at Ole Miss, that yes, he believes in air raid concepts for passing, but he's going to take what the defense gives him. And he's going to shift his mentality to what the roster puts on the table, right? So if you've got Braylon Allen and a huge offensive line, he's going to run the ball more.
Braylon Allen's ability to catch the ball out of the backfield too, like that.
Yes.
He's just got to show some pass pro stuff, and which I'm guessing because he's huge
will be fine.
Will be fine.
Yes. It's a willingness. For most running backs, it's a willingness.
Like the Heisman, the Heisman hype is, I think, pretty real because their schedule.
How many wins? 9? They have to win 9?
9. And like the over-under is 8.5.
Right, but I mean, they have to win 9. Right?
Yeah.
For it to be reasonable.
I think he for sure.
Well, so let's look at their schedule, right? Let's look at their schedule.
Yeah,
we got it right here. Okay. So Buffalo, called a win.
Yeah.
Washington State, I'm going to call that a win.
It's in Pullman, though.
Ooh, okay, coin flip.
It might. I mean,
coin flip.
Take the over in that game.
They were 7.
The over under is probably going to be 85 or something.
At least, yeah. So they were 7-6 last year. That's in Pullman. That's a tough game.
I don't know what what Washington State's offense is going to look like.
Yeah, anymore. I don't know. But, Georgia Southern. That's a win.
Yeah, should be that one. Take the over
at Purdue. That's going to be interesting.
Is Purdue going to be as good as
I don't know?
Have been. I don't.
I really like Ryan Walters. But they've got a new quarterback for the first time in like a decade.
Tough, I think. Tough sledding this year.
They're in a transition.
Let's say
at
that's
the very least. All right, so we'll call that a win. So we got them at 3 and a coin flip.
Yeah.
3 wins and a
3
coin
and
flip.
a coin flip. Okay.
Rutgers win.
Yeah.
Iowa coin flip.
It's just the rivalry.
Yeah. So we'll call 4 wins and 2 coin flips. At Illinois is going to be really, I think, challenging.
Interesting. It'll probably be like the 11 a.m. game.
Yeah, I'm calling that a coin flip as well. Ohio State, let's call it a loss. Is that fair?
I don't know.
I'm calling it. Let's call it a loss. We good?
Probably, yeah.
I mean,
you feel
at Indiana's a win.
Yeah.
Northwestern's a win.
Yeah. Northwestern's going to have a team.
How do you feel about the Nebraska-Wisconsin game this year?
It's a loss. That's a win.
Win for Wisconsin. Yeah. Okay. And then at Minnesota, I'm going to call a coin flip.
So
there's what we got.
They legitimately could have just
2,
one
3,
loss.
4 coin flips. So let's say they go.
Could Wisconsin be TCU of last year?
Interesting. That's
first year coach.
Interesting question.
Veteran-y quarterback.
A veteran quarterback, although
changed,
Duggan was there at
but
TCU, but it's a new offense.
Yeah.
You know. So we've got him at
3-3-5 defense.
8 wins. We've got him at 8 wins, 1 loss, and 4 coin flips. Nope, that's too many.
That's
7 wins.
That's an NFL.
7 wins, 1 loss, and 2 coin flips, or 4 coin flips.
Yeah, 4.
Is that the right number?
I'm
still
telling you,
they could
win, they could lose 1 game
if they win all 4 of their coin
or
flips.
2.
Yes.
I guess in regular season, then lose to Ohio State or Michigan
But
or whoever.
If they go 500 in coin flips, which it's a coin flip, that's kind of the idea. Is you go 500, that puts them at 9. That puts them at 9 wins. Yeah. So. And I think that's the number they have to get to. If you're seriously talking about Braylon Allen for Heisman, you have to be at 9 wins.
Yeah,
right.
Also, you can't.
And they probably
Caleb Williams still at.
I think the repeat thing is his biggest challenge because guys don't want to vote for the same guy twice. It's such a rarefied, it's the Archie Griffin thing. Like nobody wants to touch that again for whatever reason until you get like a new base of voters with people that aren't as established. That's my nice word for old.
Hey, when Michael Severe's here, he's a Heisman voter, or he was.
Well, we can ask him. I'll ask him. But I think they have to get to 9 wins for Braylon Allen to have a real chance. I think they probably see the problem with their schedule, even though it's relatively navigable.
Navigable? Is that a word?
Ability to navigate.
I'm pretty sure you just.
I think that's a real word.
Navigable.
Let's look it up.
I'm gonna.
The problem is he probably needs to beat Ohio State and have like a marquee game for it to be a real thing.
Easy way to move around.
Yeah, navigable.
Easy to move around in.
Your ability to navigate.
Navigable.
Yeah. See, it's a real word.
Yeah, I've never heard it.
Boom. I'm sorry. Some of us use
you're educated
SAT words.
Yeah. No, I do.
But he probably needs a marquee win.
Yeah, he does.
Because he only has the one shot at it.
I think you're probably looking at 9 is the 8.5's a good
8.5's a good over under number. It's almost like Vegas knows what they're doing.
Take over.
There's a little bit more Wisconsin stuff I want to get up to next. We still have Brad Klein coming up later to talk British Open. All that and more in the last half hour of Coffee and Cream here on a Monday.